Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics and what is known as the Access Fellow here at Jesus College at the University of Oxford. Now today we're going to see if ChatGPT and other large language model generative AI platforms could pass an Oxford interview. Now I've been involved with admissions to the University of Oxford for 14 years. I've done loads and loads of interviews, and so I'm going to see how well these generative AI platforms can deal with the sort of questions that we ask at interview. And of course, in the process, that should teach you a lot about what I'm looking for as an interviewer and what my colleagues at universities like Oxford and Cambridge are looking for when they interview people. So let's get stuck in. I thought it was probably only fair to ask a computer science question. So these are all genuine past Oxford interview questions that we're using here. And so let's start with a computer science question for ChatGPT, and the question goes as follows. An urn contains 23 white beans and 34 black beans. A monkey takes out 2 beans. If they are the same, he puts a black bean into the urn, and if they are different, he puts in a white bean from a large heap he has next to him. The monkey repeats this procedure until there is only 1 bean left. What colour is it? So if I just copy and paste that and go over to ChatGPT and drop it in, and we'll see what it comes up with. So it's very quick at answering. Now, do you need to be that fast? Absolutely not. In fact, I would really encourage in an interview setting for you to take a breath and just collect your thoughts before you just blurt something out. Because interestingly, if you do just blurt the first thing that comes out of your head, it's not really very likely to be your thoughts at all. It's probably going to have been an idea that's been implanted by someone else or something you've taken out of a book. And it's therefore not your thoughts. And I really want to get to know you in the interview, right? I'm interviewing you and I want to know how you think through problems. And so just sort of blurting out the first thing that comes into your mind is not necessarily a great idea. That doesn't mean you should sit in silence sort of contemplating for 2 minutes or something. You do want to start talking fairly quickly. But if you take 5 seconds or so just to sort of think and really focus on the question and the question's components and its words, and then start thinking out loud. So don't feel like you have to solve the problem immediately, but start just sort of saying, right, well, let me sort of go through this step by step and break down the problem into some more manageable bite-sized chunks. That's a really good idea, and the tutors will help you with that. Anyway, let's see how ChatGPT's done, because it's given me a very comprehensive answer. So, number 1, the monkey starts with 23 white beans and 34 black beans in the urn. Correct. The monkey draws 2 beans from the urn. There are 2 possibilities. Either the beans are of the same colour, white or black, or they are different. That is also correct. If the 2 beans are the same colour, the monkey puts a black bean into the urn. The number of black beans increases by 1. If the 2 beans are of different colours, the monkey puts a white bean into the urn. The number of white beans increases by 1. Now let's consider the possible outcomes after the monkey's first draw. If the monkey draws 2 white beans, there are 22 white beans and 35 black beans in the urn. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because if the monkey draws 2 white beans and there were 23 white beans, then there can't be 22, there must be 21 white beans. So it's made a bit of a mistake, a bit of a sort of minor arithmetic mistake. But if that happened in the interview, if you made a little minor mistake like that, that would be fine. We would point it out to you, we'd help you sort of see that it was a mistake and help you build on it. It's not a disaster at all. Sometimes people think, oh, I made a mistake early in the interview and from then on it was a complete car crash. Not at all. Making those sorts of minor errors is absolutely fine. Indeed, it's quite useful for us to see how you cope when you do perhaps make little trip-ups like this. It's really not a big deal. Anyway, ChatGPT has made a mistake, so let's see how big of a problem this is. If the monkey draws 2 black beans, there are 23 white beans and 34 black beans in the urn. Well, that's also wrong, because if it's drawn 2 black beans, then there would be 32 black beans, and then the monkey would put 1 back in. If the monkey draws out 1 white and 1 black bean, there are 23 white beans and 34 black beans in the urn, back to the initial state. No, because if he draws 1 of each colour, then the monkey will put a white one back in, so there would be 1 fewer black one. From the above analysis, you can see that the urn's state alternates between the initial state and a slightly modified state. This pattern continues with each draw. Since the monkey keeps repeating this procedure until there's only 1 bean left, we can conclude that the last bean in the urn will be white, because the urn's state will be the same as the initial state, 23 white, 34 black, when only 1 bean remains. Okay, so that is the correct answer, that the final bean will be white in colour. but it's not really the right reasoning. In fact, it's not terribly clear reasoning. So if someone came up with the right answer, but I couldn't understand how they reached that answer in an interview, again, that's fine. I would just ask them to clarify. An interview is very much a conversation between the interviewee and the interviewer, so I just want to know a bit more about how they reached that answer. Can they show they're working? If they, by the way, came to the wrong answer, if they said a black bean was the last one, that's not a problem either, right? We're not just sort of interested in the destination, we're interested in the journey. How do you think through the puzzle? How do you help us understand your thought processes? That's what we're aiming for. I mean, let me explain to you why the white bean will be left over. So let's just sort of use a little bit of abstract thinking. So if the monkey takes 2 white beans, then they have to put 1 black bean in. If they take 2 black beans, then again they have to put 1 black bean in. If they take 1 of each, 1 white, 1 black, then they put 1 white bean in. Okay, so what sort of inferences can we draw from this? Well, that in each round the monkey will decrease the total number of beans in the pot by 1. They'll take 2 out and they'll put 1 back in. So they'll always go down by 1. So every time the monkey repeats this exercise, there will be 1 less bean in the urn. Okay, but interestingly, the number of black beans can decrease in increments of 1. So there can be an odd number or an even number of black beans in the urn. The number of white beans, however, can only decrease ever decrease by 2 or 0. Okay, because either the monkey takes 2 white beans out, or if he tries to take 1 white bean out, it has to put 1 white bean back in again. So it's just had a negative effect. It's not done anything, right? So the number of white beans has to remain odd. Okay, you can't possibly get a scenario where there's an even number of white beans in the urn. Okay, because either you've got 23 white beans and you take 2 white beans out, and therefore you've got 21 white beans, or if you try to take just 1 white bean out, you end up putting 1 back in again. So you just end up with the same state. So let's try and work out the last round of the game. So when there are only 2 beans left in the urn, what are the possibilities here? Could there be 2 white beans left as the final round? No, because you can't have an even number of white beans. All right. Could there be 2 black beans? No, because that would imply that the round prior to this, the monkey took 2 white beans out and put a black bean in, but you can't have 2 white beans as the last remaining number of beans in the urn, so that's impossible as well. So the only possible last state in the last round is 1 white and 1 black bean, and when the monkey takes those 2 different coloured ones out, they will put a white one back in, and therefore the last bean in the urn will be white. Okay, so the answer is a white bean, but ChatGPT made a few errors and used some slightly odd reasoning to get there. Now, as mentioned, we would help you get to these sorts of answers. The idea of the interview is not that we set a difficult puzzle and then we fold our arms and we sort of look sternly at you and we wait until you get it right. No, not at all. What we're actually doing is we're recreating how we teach in Oxford, which is in small group tutorials. And so you want to think of the interview process as a teaching moment. It's just like you're in a lesson, okay? And so you're working with the interviewer to reach the solution. It's not antagonistic. It's not the interviewer testing your mettle or your character or anything like that. They're just saying, can you learn with us in the style that we use? So making minor mistakes is fine. Thinking out loud, asking for help from the tutor is a good idea. It's no problem at all, and they will help you sort of break down and deconstruct the problem. You can obviously do that yourself, and typically with these sorts of mathematical problems, breaking it into a much more simple puzzle first is a good idea. So just working out what happens if the monkey does certain actions, what is the outcome, is a good place to start, and then working out what will happen right at the end of this game, if you like, once the monkey's only got 2 beans left. What are the possibilities? And that can help you reach a logical conclusion. ChatGPT did not really do that. So I'm afraid on this particular computer science question, it's done surprisingly poorly. So yeah, not so impressed. Anyway, let's try philosophy. And this is a great question from philosophy. Does Google know us better than we know ourselves? I think it's only fair to ask Google that. So we're going to use Google's Bard to see how it does. So let's submit that and see how it does. It's having a good old think, which is fine, taking a little time to think, no problem in the interview. Oh, but there's a huge answer very, very quickly. Now, what about the length of your answer? So this is quite an interesting thing. When you are interviewed, are you supposed to just talk, and get as many ideas out as you possibly can. No, an interview is a dialogue, it's a discourse, right? It's not meant as a monologue. We want to be able to talk with you about these problems. So listen very carefully to our questions, answer them precisely, but don't try and talk out all of the time. You know, you're not being judged on how much stuff you say. You're being judged on how you develop your thinking. And the tutors are there to help you develop your thinking. So if a student sort of rambled on to this extent, I would probably have to cut in and say, yeah, but have you thought about this? Can we develop that? And that's not me trying to be rude as an interviewer. That's me trying to help the student develop their line of thinking, to keep them on track, to make sure that they're saying something that is relevant and it's going to help them. It's going to give me the information I need to make the right sort of admissions decisions. So I'm sorry, Google Bard, but you're being a bit too waffly here. But let's give it a benefit of doubt and see what it's actually said. So whether or not Google knows us better than we know ourselves is a complex question with no easy answer. Fair enough, that is certainly true. On the one hand, Google collects a vast amount of data about us, including search history, location data, what we buy and watch online. This data can be used to create detailed profiles of our interests, habits, and even our personalities. In some cases, Google may even be able to predict our behavior better than we can ourselves. Yeah, good point. For example, 2014 study, it says, give me an example. So that's quite helpful. You know, you don't necessarily need to use illustrative examples, but it can really help. It can also demonstrate that you've done some wider reading around your subject. So giving illustrations of a point you're making can be super helpful. It's not required, but it can be helpful. I'll not actually read that example, just move on. On the other hand, there are also limitations to what Google knows about us. True, first, Google's data is only as good as the data it collects. If we're careful about our privacy settings and limit the amount of information we share with Google, then the company will have less complete picture of who we are. Very true. Second, Google's data is only a snapshot of our lives at a particular point in time. Finally, Google's data is only as good as the algorithms that are used to interpret it. That's very true. Overall, it is fair to say that Google knows a lot about us, but it is not clear whether or not it knows us better than we know ourselves. Google's data can be very useful for understanding our interests and habits, but it is important to be aware of its limitations. We should also be careful about how much information we share with Google and how we use its products and services. Well, it's nice of Bard to warn us about how we use Google, but you know, it's a good answer. It's interesting. It's nuanced. It's quite balanced, right? Thinking about, well, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. I mean, if anything, it's too balanced. So I've asked, you know, tell me, does Google know us better than we know ourselves? So I want a fairly resolute answer to this. But Bard is saying it's not clear whether or not it knows us better than we know ourselves. Now, in an interview setting, I would push the interviewee. I would say, sure, this is a difficult problem. It involves a conceptual difficulty, in particular with regards to what it means to know us or know ourselves. But I still want you to answer it, okay? I don't want you to sit on the fence. I don't want you to duck the responsibility of trying to solve this puzzle. So I will push you for an answer. And that's not, you know, to say that I would disapprove of someone who points out the various difficulties in answering this question, or who wants to sort of raise, well, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. But ultimately, the only way we solve problems like this is being resolute to a certain extent. In other words, saying, do you know what, given what we've considered, given the arguments that we've weighed up, I would argue that Google does know us better than we know ourselves, or does not, right? So just be slightly careful not to sit too uncomfortably on the fence. You might change your mind in the interview, which is fine, right? We're not looking for you to be completely resolute and not take into consideration counter arguments that we will raise. But we do want you to be clear and come up with an argument, not sort of say that we can't decide this or there is no solution to it, because I'm afraid that's intellectually a bit easy, right? It's easy to say, oh, this problem's too hard, I don't want to answer it, oh, I'm going to hide. We want to get a sense of what you would argue, even if you're not 100% confident. Because, I mean, I'm not 100% confident in any argument I make, because, you know, knowledge is pretty relative and contingent. So, you know, we just got to give it a try, all right? So I think that's one problem with Bard. They've spoken too much, a bit too waffly, a bit too chatty, not giving me a chance to put in any further questions, and also sitting on the fence ever so slightly. Nice bit of nuance, you know, it's nice to see them evaluate different arguments, but they've not come up with a particularly clear conclusion, and I would want to push them a bit further on that. Another thing to think about is that we quite like it when students think outside of boxes. You know, the sort of interview performances that stick out in my memory are the ones where students don't just argue the easy points, but they also try and make their life a little bit more difficult, and they show off the range of their thinking skills. Now, this is not to say that you should therefore say something completely wacky, but you just need to be open-minded to some lesser considered arguments. So in this case, does Google know us better than we know ourselves? It would be really interesting to see a student make a strong case that absolutely, 100%, Google definitely knows us better than we know ourselves, right? And they can come up with a strong reason for that. And so that's not them being sort of a conspiracy theorist with a tinfoil hat or anything. It's them coming up with a really sort of interesting assessment of what it means to know us and how much self-knowledge we have, or whether, for example, we live with sort of narratives or stories that we tell ourselves. I am this sort of person, but Google really knows, because Google's been reading all of my emails, knows my location data, knows what I've been watching on YouTube. So I might say to the world, oh, I'm a terribly sort of sophisticated person, but actually I'm just watching, you know, endless cat videos on YouTube. I did not say that's not sophisticated, but you see what I mean, right? That we might be sort of slightly deluded in our self-knowledge. And I'd be really interested by someone who is willing to go there, who's willing to come up with an interesting argument. You don't have to say something that counters intuition, but also you don't have to fully believe what you're arguing. You just need to show that you have thinking skills. And making your life a little bit difficult is a bit like going on the Great British Bake Off and making a cake out of slightly unusual ingredients. Because it's innovative, because it's creative, because it's showing more technical skill, it's more likely to be rewarded. And it's kind of the same thing in an Oxford interview. Okay, so last question comes from English, and it is, what makes a good joke? Right, let's go back to ChatGPT, because this is almost like a Turing test. In other words, testing the humanity of an algorithm. You know, if they understand humor, then we're all doomed, because they're going to take over the world. So let's see what ChatGPT makes of this. What makes a good joke? So again, pretty quick with a comprehensive looking answer, listing a lot of factors. Interesting. Okay, so let's sort of quickly go through it. A good joke can vary greatly depending on individual tastes and cultural factors. True, but there are some common elements that often make a joke enjoyable. Here are some characteristics of a good joke: surprise or twist, timing, relatability, wordplay, absurdity, exaggeration, self-deprecation, social commentary, playfulness, incongruity, physical humor, clever setups, economy of words, cultural relevance, non-offensive. Okay, it's important to remember that humor is subjective, and what one person finds funny, another may not. Additionally, the context and the audience plays a significant role in determining what is considered a good joke. I mean, it's a really comprehensive answer. It's coming up with many of the common theories around what makes for an effective joke. Incidentally, this is a question for English literature, because of course humor and comedy, very common literary devices. They crop up all over the place in plays and even poems, and certainly in novels. And so therefore the construction of a good joke is an important question around literary criticism that is worthy of our time. And to be fair, ChatGPT has done really well at assessing some of the core elements of what tends to make things funny. Now, again, it's not necessarily demonstrating capacity to think outside of the box. So I would class this as an excellent start to an interview. I mean, it's too long, too wordy. I would want to have more of a conversation. If a student started going on and on and on about different types of humour, I would probably want to jump in and say, okay, have you thought about this? But still, it's a great start. But I would want to develop their thinking into some interesting levels. And the way I would do that as an interviewer is that I would ask them to really focus on the question wording, really drill into what some of those words mean. I mean, for example, what makes a good joke? ChatGPT here has assumed that I mean good in the sense of an effective joke, a joke that makes us laugh, which is a totally reasonable interpretation of that word. But there are other interpretations of the word good, which could be interesting to explore. So, for example, we could think of a good joke as being one that is somehow morally edifying. You know, in other words, it improves us somehow by saying the joke. Or it could be a good joke in the sense that it brings people together, or it resolves some sort of conflict. So the goodness of the joke doesn't necessarily just need to hinge on whether or not it makes us roll around with tears in our eyes. It could also be to do with some other effects that we might class as good. And ChatGPT is right to say that that is contextual, and the goodness of a joke will vary in time and space. Absolutely true. But then also the definition of good is also variable. And indeed what even would be classed as a joke. The construction of that joke, whether it's a one-liner, whether it's a limerick poem, whether it's a sort of a long, long-running, repeated pun, or whatever it is. The construction of a joke is also really interesting and really contextual. So there are various sort of avenues that I'd want to explore, and the way I would do that as an interviewer is just keep coming back to the question and ask for some quite precise further information on what the interviewee thinks about the question wording. In other words, I might say, okay, that's interesting, you've told me what makes you laugh, but tell me how else you could describe a good joke. What else would you describe as good? And that's how we could explore the different interpretations of that word good. So there are various avenues that we could go down that could potentially be quite rich, quite interesting, quite analytically sophisticated, that ChatGPT has not taken. ChatGPT effectively is a know-it-all. It's almost literally a know-it-all, right? And we're not really looking for know-it-alls in Oxford interviews. And that's a common misconception. A lot of people think you've just got to brain dump everything you know about a particular subject and show off how much stuff you've read and how well informed you are and so on. Actually, we're more looking for think-it-alls. We're looking for people who are very good at solving complex problems and thinking various ways of how to resolve that problem and then coming up with a particular answer that they prefer. Okay? And ChatGPT and Bard have done okay at that, but they've kind of just told us lots of facts and information that they've scrubbed from the internet. The analysis and the argumentation they're showing needs development, it needs growth. And in the interview, we would help the students get there, right? We wouldn't expect you to do this off the top of your head. But hopefully you've got some sense of the sorts of things we're looking for and how you can help yourself get there. This video is going to be part of a series of videos to do with interviews that will be coming out in advance of the admission season here in Oxford. I've also got a playlist with lots of other videos, including specific example interview questions, which should hopefully provide you with all sorts of resources and tools for preparing for any interviews you have, either at Oxford or Cambridge or other universities around the world. I hope this is all helpful, but if there's anything that's unclear, you must just let me know in the comments below. And why don't you have a try with some generative AI tools and see how they cope with interview questions and what you think about them. And if you come up with some results, let us know in the comments. I'd love to see them. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I wish you all the best. Keep in touch. Bye now.